Hi, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 7 of My Words, Our Journey. My name is Monty, and today we'll start with Chapter 33. Madison had seen all the reports, from local WNGK, local Channel 11, to Fox News on cable, the interviews, the speculation, and the so-called experts spewing their drivel. She could not take any more of it. So for the last 2 days, she had avoided news altogether. If she had to watch poor Sandy relive the fatal shooting of her loving husband, or the critically injured young FBI agent who still remained in a coma, she was not sure what she would do, or where her mental state would end up. For days, Madison had been in a coma of her own. It felt like someone had snaked a mini blender in through her ear and hit the puree button. So instead of Madison stilling around the house like a lobotomy patient, she worked out hard at the gym, fixed nice meals for her sister's family, and finished 3 quilts she had been struggling to get through, the whole while trying to convince herself that the others were still supporting her, wishing her success in her mission, and looking forward to the end result as much as she. Today, she was doing something Madison thought she would never be able to do on her own. She was car shopping. The old Dodge was making a funny noise, and she could not take a chance of getting stuck during her final assignment. Besides, it was one of life's little pleasures she had not been able to enjoy until today. While Ryan's life insurance policy was still being debated by the parties that be, the 2 supplemental policies he had taken out through work had decided to pay out and move on. The town was split on what actually happened to him. There were those that believed he was off on an island somewhere, keeping out of sight and drinking umbrella drinks, while the rest figured he was either dead by suicide or had met up with someone who just didn't approve of a wife beater. Either way, he was gone. Driving the 2-door soft-top Wrangler around town made her feel wonderful. There was a chill in the air, so she didn't dare take a chance of taking the black convertible top off. But she could imagine how great it would be in the spring, summer, and even early fall. Ryan would never have approved. Maybe that's why she had already determined she was going to buy it. Though a little more than she wanted to spend, the numbers could work out if she just put a little less in savings and stayed with Sis just a little longer than planned. Her hope was that when this was all over, she would move in with one or more of the women, maybe a nice townhome or something. She also figured she would have to get a part-time job eventually to help supplement the insurance money. Madison had already decided she would choose the job. She would not take just anything. They were going through a lot of trouble to change their lives. She refused to think she would go back to waiting tables for truckers at a truck stop to make ends meet. She refused. Tuning out the salesman in his passenger seat, she thought of how life would be in just a few weeks. The bond was strong, no matter the setbacks. When she finally noticed where they were driving, she was surprised to see they were on a road she was not familiar with. The young man in the passenger seat had been giving her directions, and she had followed them without paying much attention. Her thoughts were on other things. It was a little frightening. Madison had lost several moments, unable to remember driving off the main road onto this narrow back road. Immediately, she began looking for a spot to turn the Wrangler around. There's a great place to turn around just up ahead. I like bringing customers out here so they can get a feel for the automobile. Unwind it a little if they want, if you know what I mean. I've never seen anyone back here. She could understand that. There were no barns, no livestock, no homes, nothing but thick woods on her left and a low-cut field to her right as far as the eye could see. It's right up there on the left. Feel free to gun it if you want. There was something about his pretty face and awkward smile that gave her the willies. Without a word, she continued on. Were there any good ones left? Every day she thought there was less and less of a chance. When she pulled into a small clearing, just large enough for her to make the wide circle without having to negotiate a turn, her passenger asked her to stop the Jeep for a second. Something feels funny on this side, maybe like a tire might be going down or something. Without waiting for her to come to a complete stop, he hopped out of the open door and onto the leaves and brush that covered the ground. Can you come here real quick? I think this tire looks low. I'm horrible at this kind of thing. Was this his way of making a move? Really? She thought. Madison hesitated and then realized she had lived scared long enough. No more. So, with purpose, she hopped from the driver's seat, past the back of the shiny new SUV. Does the back tire look lower than the front to you? Taking a step back, he motioned for her to get closer and take a look. Both tires looked the same to her. Before she could turn and answer, Madison felt him behind her, felt him rub against her back. Half turning to protest, she was stopped by the grip he took of both her arms. Turning her back around, he was behind her. She could feel his breath on her neck. Do you know how pretty you are? I'm so worked up right now, man. You look better than 90% of the college girls out there. Believe me. He was talking fast, breathing heavy, and not loosening the hold he held on her. Don't make a mistake that will ruin the rest of your life, young man. Just let me go. We ride back, and we pretend this never happened. I'm one of the last women you'd want to mess with. Trust me. Madison purposely spoke softly, controlled, and without a sign of pleading. She wanted him to know she was not going to submit to his will. I promise you'll like it. They all do in the end, he whispered in her ear. She could tell he felt no threat, no concern about her retaliation. Mistake. With a move she had seen on one of her survival shows, Madison, when her attacker moved in again to whisper his sweet nothings in her ear, pulled all her strength and brought her right fist up into his left eye. This may not have broken his grip, if not for the keys she had placed in her hand as she exited the vehicle. You could never be too careful, she thought. It was not a fatal or even direct hit, but it was all she needed to turn out of his clutch, spin, and kick him hard as any college soccer player had kicked the black and white ball. Losing her balance on uneven soil and landing to the ground only a few feet from the 6-inch knife that had fallen out of his jacket pocket while still in its sheath. The sight took her back just long enough for him to make a play for the weapon. Moving in fast, she kicked again. This time he was ready, and Madison hit the ground with the back of her head with force. She knew if he got on top of her and in control with the knife, she would have to be at his mercy, and she had made him mad. The knife had been pushed under the leaves and brush at the edge of the clearing. Her attacker was having trouble finding it and seemed to have forgotten she was even there momentarily. Mistake. From her vantage point on the ground, she could see the tip through a small group of branches that could have been the start of someone's campfire. It would be close. She had to try. It was close, and Madison got lucky. If he would have turned right instead of left when he had heard her make her move, he would have had her by the hair. Instead, the second it took for him to recover, Madison had the knife out of its casing, pointed directly at the throat of the frightened boy, who now was not so confident in himself. You get a grip on yourself. Pull your head out of your butt and get in the front seat. We'll drive back to the lot without saying a word. And if that happens, just as I said, I'll get in my car and drive away. Like a beaten down dog, the slumped over wannabe rapist moved towards the passenger's door. The only sound from the time they slammed their doors in unison to the time they stopped in front of her Dodge was the sound of the tires on the road. Watching as he walked away, still trying to make his left eye feel better by rubbing his palm across it, she thought, he will never change. Chapter 34. Jill hated hospitals. Leonard avoided them like he avoided church on Sunday morning. And Kenny wasn't bothered at all by the thought of entering a facility where healing, dying, and birth all took place. It was all part of the greater plan. They had all arrived early in the morning, straight from the airport to rental car office to hospital for each one of them. The past 18 hours had been a blur for the trio, each taking their own path in dealing with the news in their own way. Now they were face to face in the lobby of the hospital, tired, confused, and ready to see Shawn. Unfortunately, he was still in a coma, and the numerous questions each had would have to wait. The two men comforted Jill the best they could. Being in law enforcement does not mean that one has learned the art of comforting someone after a tragedy, however, and the pair were proof of that. They were clumsy, but Jill appreciated the effort, and in a small way, it did help her pass the time until she was allowed to enter Shawn's room. She had been warned the sight of her husband might be unsettling by the nurses on duty, who looked like she had spent too much time on the floor over the past several days. Unsettled is exactly how she felt. To see him there, so vulnerable. Jill had described the man she was going to marry to her family and friends before they met. She used adjectives like stocky, burly bear, and hulky. Now the man that occupied the bed before her was small in comparison, small and fragile. For more than 15 minutes, she could not approach the bedside. For that period of time, she stood on the far side of the room and wept. Not loudly. She did not want those outside the room to hear her. Shawn would want her to be strong. The two detectives caught up with each other. They caught up on their daily lives, talked about sports, the instability in the world, Leonard's retirement, and finally about the guilt they both felt about not being more supportive when Shawn had reached out by email. I was too wrapped up in my own world, Kenny stated, and Leonard concurred. What could have gotten him into so much trouble in such a short amount of time? Kenny thought out loud. Leonard was lost. He didn't have a clue. He did know one thing for certain, though. The two men would not leave until they had the answers. I put a down payment on my boat, Leonard stated as he picked up a year-old Sports Illustrated. Kenny didn't answer. He just thumbed through the same golf magazine he'd been pretending to read for the last little while. This wasn't easy for either of them. Turning his wrist, she studied the lines on his palm and the length and strength that still was apparent in his hand. She hoped he was using that might to fight to regain his consciousness. Jill smiled, almost giggled when she thought about how far they had come. Their first date had been spent in the emergency room, and now here they were, years later. They had been able to laugh about the prior, and she could only hope this time would be the same sometime in the future. Hope and prayed. Out loud, she began to speak to Shawn. She had heard too many stories over the years about people speaking to coma victims and the positive results, so she believed they had merit. Shawn, darling, my love, it's Jill. I'm here now, and I will go nowhere until you go with me. I promise you that. With a gentle squeeze, she continued, Do you remember our first date? She laughed. You had pursued me like the coyote chasing after the roadrunner. That is what my mom and sister used to say, anyways. Turning in the less than comfortable chair, trying to find a position she could manage. It was a beautiful summer day, June 23rd, a Friday. I had run out of excuses. You caught me off guard with the picnic suggestion. I just couldn't say no one more time to that lovable face. You scared me back then. I saw you with all your friends around the school, so confident, so well liked by all the different cliques. I just didn't want to get hurt by the Trambler. You promised me a gourmet lunch, breathtaking scenery, and stimulating conversation. Do you remember? She paused while she thought back to how good he had looked when he picked her up that day. Jill was not short at over 5'7" tall, and Shawn towered over her. Wearing a pair of dress shorts and matching shirt, he had stood on her family's front porch and promised her parents he would be safe and respectful and have her back before dark. She remembered how she felt when he spoke with the nervousness and excitement she held inside. Shawn, you looked so good standing there in your confident outfit, fresh haircut, and big grin. I could tell right away my parents had liked you, and my sister Lily had thought you were one of the cool guys. Our lunch, honestly, I didn't have high expectations. You had made homemade potato salad, fresh cut fruit, with a sweet homemade dip, a bottle of sparkling cider, a sandwich which we shared that had been stacked so high that I remember it falling apart and us eating it in sections. I remember it had been so good and also so messy. I was so impressed. I don't think you knew how much that meant to me. It showed me a different side of Shawn Trammell, a side I liked a lot. A nurse poked her head in the door and whispered as if she didn't want to wake her patient. 10 minutes, it will need you to step out for a few minutes. Jill nodded, smiled, and went right back to talking to her man. We had passed through the patch of wildflowers on the way to the perfect spot, and we had decided to pick 2 bouquets for our moms before we left. Do you remember? It was just like in the movies. I could not have asked for a better first date to that point. Dancing amongst the flowers, red, yellow, purple, and pink flowers. I could not even have been any happier. Watching you laugh and prancing around, I wish I'd have gotten a picture. Who would have guessed in a perfect place like this we'd have stumbled upon a nest of bumblebees nestled in the ground at the edge of the field? Who would have guessed, huh? She looked around the room. They all looked the same, she thought. Then she went back to her story. It was me who had turned to see you trying to fight off the swarm that had come out of the ground to protect their home. And without thinking what to do, I ran to help. Help you do what? I don't know. I guess it was just a natural reaction. Would I do it again? I love you, Shawn. But boy, those little buggers hurt. You scooped me up in your arms. I'll never forget. Totally ignoring the stinging you were getting from all directions, and ran with me. I remember feeling safe in your care, in your arms. You didn't stop until we were back to the car, leaving behind all our stuff. We were covered in stings, feeling nauseous and afraid we'd been stung way too many times. So you, with all the pain you must have been in, drove us to the emergency room, 20 miles away, where we were told we'd have to wait at least another 30 minutes. I remember you held me so gently so it wouldn't hurt, but strong enough so I knew how much you cared, until our parents showed up. Do you remember how bad that cream smelled? It was awful. She rubbed his hand, not wanting the nurse to come in and make her leave. Jill wanted the chance to make more memories with her Shawn, more opportunities to share life's experiences. Chapter 35. Madison went straight back to the house, showered, thought about things, events that shaped one's lives, decisions made, life choices, regrets. It had been a long shower. A time of reflection, a time to make a decision and concrete her transformation from man's ragdoll to dirtbag's worst nightmare. And she had made a decision. The young man would not go unpunished for his actions. After picking out her shortest miniskirt, tightest sweater, and highest heels, she headed off for a night on the town. Something had changed for her out on that desert road, fighting with the young man that society had taught could take advantage of women. She refused to be that person anymore. At a payphone 3 miles from her home, she dialed the number on the card. Hi, I was there a few days ago looking at a car, and Mark Glenfield, I think his name was helping me. Is he working tonight by chance? He is. Until 9 o'clock. Thank you very much. I'll come by. Hanging up and looking at her watch, she decided to head towards the dealership in case he left early for some reason. She could wait across the street and still have a clear view of the lot. 20 minutes later, she was listening to an interview on one of the local country stations. Some artist talking about his career and his newest Best Of collection that was coming out next month. As she half listened, Madison thought about her friends and how they were dealing with everything. The ones that had already been set free, and Megan, who wanted to be last, and now had sent her a message letting her know when and where. And how was the FBI guy? She had not heard an update. If he died, how would that affect the others' feelings toward what they had done? It would be impossible to guess. For her, it was easy. He had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, for some reason unknown to her. Across the street, someone came barreling through the front door. It was Mark, she could tell by the way he moved, before she could see his face as he passed underneath the parking lot lights. From his movements, he had somewhere important to go. Here was not the place, she thought. Putting the Dodge in drive and placing her foot on the brake, she waited. His red Cherokee pulled up to the stop sign, rolled to a near stop, and continued on to the next road, making a left across traffic, and sped off. Madison was not fully taken by surprise, but she did have to push her car a little bit to catch up and pull in behind her intended target. After a few moments of driving over the speed limit, taking the chance of being pulled over with not only a loaded weapon, but a loaded weapon that had been involved in several crimes as of late, she watched as he turned off the road into a family-owned gas station. He had turned so abruptly that it would have been too obvious if she would have tried the same maneuver. So she passed the first entrance, entered the second, and watched him run in and then back out with a small brown bag. Was he old enough to buy alcohol, she thought? Back on the road, the two autos traveled another 5 miles before making a left onto a dirt road that had several homes on the left-hand side and a large dairy farm on the right. There was no turning back for her. She would follow this through or live with the regret. Surprising her, the SUV did not turn into a modest home on the left. Instead, it turned into a large drive that led to what could only be described as a mansion among the dairy barns. Still, she followed, figuring the young buck would count on this being one of his buddies following him home. When he stopped and seemed to be digging around in the back seat for something, Madison started to wonder what had made her do this. It was not looking like a very smart idea at the moment. Exiting the driver's side, Mark started back towards her with something in his right hand. She thought it might be a tire iron. He still wanted to play with her. She could see the surprise in his eyes when he saw who had been following him. "Change your mind?" He laughed as he continued to approach. "As a matter of fact, I did, Mark. I decided you should be punished," Madison said flatly as she slipped from the passenger's seat out into the gravel drive with one quick movement. Her intentions had only been merely to scare the creep, but his smugness and his manner caused her to snap. "You want to play? I came to play." "I need a good spanking every once in a while," he said as he moved in closer. "You got lucky before. Let's see how it turns out now. We'll take your car." Raising the gun, she waited for nothing. A shot fired. A shot hitting its target. Down he went without protest. Dead on arrival, the young man would attack no one ever again. It had been a headshot, and she could see where the bullet had made its entrance, half to the dead man and half to the wind. "I will not be pushed around ever again," Madison said. She had figured she would fire a couple shots around his ankles. He would pee his pants, and that would be that. Sometimes plans change. Turning to return to her car, she was startled by the sound somewhere behind her. As she turned back towards where Mark now lay, she caught the sight of a flashlight coming around the corner of one of the outbuildings and the glimpse of an elderly woman wielding a shotgun in her left hand and a feeding bucket in her right. "Marky? Marky? Is everything okay, Marky?" Madison was frozen in place as she watched the scene unfold before her. The old woman literally stepped on the body before she stopped and lowered the flashlight. Madison could tell the woman must be close to 90 years old. What was she doing out here by herself? When she dropped to the ground, trembling, crying, and whispering, "Marky, wake up, Marky, wake up!" It was brutal to watch. A moment later, sensing she was not alone, and directing her flashlight towards Madison and her car, the grieving woman stood slowly, aiming her weapon with care. "What have you done to my grandson? What have you done?" It was still a whisper, but louder than before. But still Madison could consider it to be an eerie whisper. There was some distance between them. She felt confident she had several feet before there was a chance the old woman could make out any features on either her or the car. Had to move quickly, though. "He was all I had left. All I had. What did you do?" The first shot was high, way above her head. The second came directly after the first, and Madison could tell her aim had come down significantly. Time to fly. She wanted to stay and explain to the woman what had led to this place. She could not, for numerous reasons. She could not try to make this woman understand. Besides, it would hold no comfort whatsoever. The time between the first two shots and the moment the old woman stood face to face with Madison could only have been counted in mere seconds. Later, Madison would ponder how the old woman had moved so quickly in the dim light with the bulky shotgun and old tired legs. As the shaky light shone upon her, she raised her left forearm to cover her face. She had been seen. Even with that realization, she still never considered harming the grandmother, she would realize later. With urgency, Madison turned and dove in the direction of her vehicle. The next shot sounded close. The gunslinger was honing her skills and adjusting to the light. It would only be fate that would permit her escape. Chapter 36. An hour after she had been politely asked to leave her husband's side, she was welcomed back to his room. Leonard and Kenny had been kind, nervous and unsure, but kind. The hour had been spent in the cafeteria, sipping coffee and talking about anything and everything they could think of, other than the current situation. Why did men have such a hard time with life's circumstances? A gasp of air escaped her lips before she could even consider holding it back. On either side of the bed now stood two large metal objects, each supporting a large plastic bag full of liquid. One green, one more of an off brown color, and both dripping ever so slightly into the tubes that ran down alongside the structures and ended underneath the bandages in Shawn's arms. The green in his right and the other in his left. Somehow they made her cringe. Seeing her man unable to even take in nourishment on his own could have been enough to send her into what she liked to call a state of self-pity. Jill was not going to let that happen, however. Shawn had always been there for her, and now it was her time. She would be strong enough for both of them. With the addition of the tubes and contraptions, she could not get close as she had been before. So Jill grabbed her chair, that had been moved closer to the wall, and pulled it up next to the bed level with Shawn's waist, and took a gentle hold of his thumb and index finger with her right hand. The main lights overhead had been turned off, and the shades drawn. Now the only light was provided by a small table lamp on the far side of the room opposite the bed. Being a believer in the power of positive thinking, Jill started thinking about the life they had built together. Their courtship had been shorter than most. Jill knew only a few dates that she was going to marry Shawn. She knew he was the one. Shawn, on the other hand, she would find out later, fought the feelings he had felt within his heart. Friends had told her at the wedding how he had tormented over the idea of marriage, how he had tried convincing himself he was too young, too stubborn, too poor, too childish, too focused on himself. Jill had informed Shawn if he waited until he was all grown up and wealthy, they would still be waiting. Out loud, with a voice just above a whisper, she began to speak to him. Shawn, darling, how can I help think about the past, knowing you're fighting for our future? Do you remember when you proposed to me? A weekend right out of National Lampoon's vacation movies. You have been so excited about our trip to the mountains. I can still see the glimmer you had in your eye when you were describing the cabin, with its fireplace, waterbed, and in-room jacuzzi. Involuntarily, Jill snickered. I also remember the disappointment and sheer horror when we pulled up to the single-wide, run-down trailer with the faded office sign. The man sitting on the front porch looked in his late 70s, wearing overalls that looked like he had been wearing them since the early 50s. And when he smiled, revealing the absence of teeth and damaged gums, I felt you cringe. I could feel you struggle to make a decision, push forward or slam the car in reverse and speed away. Jill paused as she shifted in her seat, reflecting on how she had been able to read this dear man so quickly. So for all that happened those 2 days, I wouldn't have missed it for anything. Jill stopped and rubbed his forearm, wondering if she was getting through. I wondered if the whole thing was over and you'd pushed forward. Was it because you didn't want to stop? Because you knew you were going to ask me to marry you? Or were you afraid you weren't going to get your deposit back? Watching you through the windshield force yourself up the stairs and face the old-timer caused me to want you even more. It was funny, but Jill could feel herself blushing. That's why once in the room, it took 40 minutes to realize the fireplace was boarded up, the waterbed had a slow leak, and the jacuzzi was actually a regular-sized tub with 2 rusty and clogged jets. The place truly had been a dump, and they were probably pretty lucky neither had caught anything while they were there. Stopping for a moment, Jill promised herself when they pulled through this, she and Shawn were going to find a nice cabin somewhere in the woods and spend at least a week. Closing her eyes, she prayed a prayer of thanks, not wanting to only ask for Shawn's well-being, but also to show her gratitude for the blessings they had both received in their lives. Jill's prayer went on and on. They had much to be thankful for. When finished, she began to speak to Shawn again. You could not have been any more nervous that night, looking down at her modest but beautiful wedding ring and band. When you took me out on the rickety deck to stare at the moon, I thought you had lost it completely. And then when you disappeared to the car and cranked up Crazy for You, our song, on the tape player, it hit me. I don't think you noticed because of all the emotions you were dealing with, but I instantly felt my legs give way a little. Waiting for you to make it back up the deck, I must have went back and forth 50 times. Is he? Isn't he? Never once did I have to consider my answer. Never once. Chapter 37. The distraught granny had emptied her gun again, trying to end Madison's life. With unstable hands, she reloaded so she could continue her quest, which is what saved Madison from certain death. As she sped away, she was trying to convince herself the old woman was too busy fumbling with ammo to be memorizing her license plate. She was old, and it was dark. The odds were in Madison's favor. Madison had not thought about the dirtbag's family or who would be hurt by his demise. She knew all the things they would say. He was such a good boy. Why had he been taken in his prime? He's in a better place. Everyone liked him. He had no enemies. Much of that may or may not be true, but Madison was sure of the one thing. She had taken out a young man that had hurt women in the past and would hurt others if given the chance. What had he said? Something like, they all like it in the end. As she pulled into Tippy's Tavern parking lot, she reconsidered her decision to be out in public so soon after a near-death experience and a murder. In the end, the need for a drink outweighed her better judgment. Besides, she could use an alibi. One last look in the mirror, a hand through her damp hair, and off she went to check out tonight's karaoke talent. A few drinks, some bad songs, home, and to bed, alone. Kenny and Leonard had yet to see their friend Shawn, and until he was out of the coma, that was all right with the pair. Neither would say it out loud, but it felt right to be close. They knew, without a doubt, he would have done the same for them. Their friendship had not been long or tested, but it was a friendship nonetheless, and they both, in their own way, silently asked a higher power for a chance to speak to Shawn, find out what had happened, and punish those responsible. A young woman at the reception desk had been kind enough to inquire about their overnight accommodations, and when she found out they had none, she quickly jumped on the phone and made them indefinite room reservations at a hotel 4 blocks over. She explained there was one closer, but she wouldn't have put her ex-mother-in-law there. With a wicked smile, she turned and headed back to her post. Leonard could tell she was a friendly sort, but he could also tell she kind of had a thing for Kenny. And now she knows exactly where he'll be staying. 2 doctors that they had spoken to held no punches. There was a chance Shawn could never come out of his coma. And if he did, there was a chance he would be damaged somehow. When they had heard those words, with Joe present, it was clear neither had a clue what to say or do. So in the end, Kenny had made some positive statements about Kenny's strength, about Shawn's strength and will, and Leonard did his classic head bob, and that's right, while he was thinking, if I have to read one more Pro Bass edition, they're going to have to put me in a bed next to Shawn. Kenny wondered what Shawn found out so quickly, and would they get a chance to carry out his revenge? It was not a state of mind he was used to by any means. Kenny would not actually recall ever feeling emotions that stirred deep within like these. He had decided that even if Shawn woke up, walked out of the hospital today, never had a side effect from the ordeal, someone still needed to pay. It was not right for someone dedicated to helping others to wind up like this. And Jill, his heart broke for her and caused him to second guess his quest for love. Why would any woman in her right mind jump into such a crazy life? And with that, we conclude this episode. I hope you enjoyed, and will join me next week as we continue our journey. Thank you, and have a great day.